The mystique of silent film star Rudolph Valentino is just as popular today as it was 60 years ago when he died. And there's one man who knows more about Rudolph Valentino than anyone else in the world. He's the president of the Rudolph Valentino Guild, and he's from London, England. His name is Mr. Leslie Flint. Leslie, how many members are there in the worldwide Rudolph Valentino Guild?
Well, when you ask me about members, as members, there are many hundreds of members as such. Mostly I would call them associate members, because since all our activity is in London and they're living abroad in many instances, they're not able to attend the film shows that we run regularly when we show the Valentino pictures in a small hall that I have attached to my house. And we run a movie once a month, a Valentino movie, that is, that I've been able to collect over many, many years. There are many, many people who are interested who write and ask for photographs or information, or could they obtain books appertaining to his life, and I'm able to advise them in some instances where they might be able to obtain such books, because most of them are rare now. Most of them are written in the 20s and early 30s. But we have a tremendous interest in Valentino, in England particularly, and of course, as indeed it is true to say, around the world. But the activities in London to do with Valentino are probably unique, inasmuch that, having collected over many years most of the Valentino pictures, able to show them to a limited audience, that is, members and friends of members, then it all spreads and enlarges, of course. And of course, in London we had a premiere of an old silent picture of Valentino's, Blood and Sand, which was attended by royalty. We had a royal premiere. It's an unheard of thing. They had a terrific turnout. They even had a big dinner after the show. Princess Margaret was in attendance with Lord Snowdon. It was in aid of charity. And it was a tremendous success. And the film ran for about 2 months.
What is it about, excuse me, what is it about Rudolph Valentino that attracts people, even royalty? What is the mystique?
Well, that's almost an impossible question to answer. There are so many different angles and aspects to it. Of course, one has to bear in mind that Valentino came at a very important aspect of time. Just after the First World War, thousands and thousands of women throughout Europe particularly had lost their husbands or their sweethearts, and they were probably doomed in many instances to live a very unhappy sort of state of existence as old maids. And they saw this wonderful romantic human being who moved so gracefully, who looked so wonderful, and appeared in magnificent costume. And also you have to bear in mind that the films were silent, and people's imagination had to play a very important part. And of course the films, although they were silent, they were accompanied by big orchestras in the bigger theatres. I mean, an orchestra of 30 or 40 musicians would play mood music, you see. And of course this all added. Here was this wonderful human being, so attractive, so handsome, moved so beautifully, so gracefully, that women really went to town. I mean, they really were taken, into such an extent of ecstasy that he became world famous. You see, before Valentino, the American hero was, with all due respect, a very nice, young, attractive, blonde, American type of boy who had no European background or influence. He wasn't able to make love. When he did, it was very ham-fisted. Here was this man full of ardor, full of Latin attraction, and this remarkable aspect of personality that women just fell hook, line, and sinker.
Is that why he was more attractive to women, but the men didn't like
were
him
jealous.
so much?
You see, the whole tragedy. Poor Valentino had to suffer a great deal of this because men were jealous of him. The girls would take their boyfriends to see Valentino in the Sheikh or whatever the film happened to be, and the men were resentful. They thought, oh my God, I don't look like that man up there. And the girls were swooning. And in consequence, a lot of them were, the men that is, were jealous.
Yes, he had a great deal of success with women on the screen, but in his private life, It was another story.
Well, Valentino off the screen was entirely different to what he was on. One has to bear in mind that he came from Italy when he was 18 years of age. He didn't come as an immigrant. His family had a wonderful background. His mother was the daughter of a Parisian doctor. His father was in the Italian cavalry, an officer. He had a very good background and upbringing. He spoke several languages fluently. He didn't come as an immigrant. He came with money, but of course he was young, and his money went very quickly. And indeed, it got to the point where he had to sleep in Central Park. He had no money to rent a room even, and his clothes were in a boarding house, and he couldn't afford to pay the rent, and they wouldn't let him have his clothes back. But eventually, fortunately for Valentino, he did get a job as a dancing partner. There's one thing about him, you see, he had this natural grace, and he danced beautifully, and he was able to earn a living as a dancing partner. Indeed, he became very famous. He danced with two of America's most famous women dancers of the time. One was Joan Sawyer, and they made quite a sensational hit. They danced at the Winter Garden in New York, and gradually he made his way down to Hollywood because of a man, an actor, called Norman Kerry, whom he'd met previously. And Norman Kerry said, you know, Rudy, you should be a great success in movies with your physique, your looks, and I'll do everything I can to help you. And in consequence, gradually, he got into the movie industry. He played minor roles in the beginning. He'd play anything to earn enough to eat and so on. But the point is that Valentino's unique personality at that early period wasn't the kind of personality that appealed to the producers and the film industry. They always looked upon Latins as dagos, usually played by Mexicans or people from across the border. And Valentino had this extraordinary dark good look about him that they could only see him as a villain. And then until Mae Murray, who in her day was a very famous actress in movies, she had met Valentino in New York, and she danced with him, and she liked him. And this was during the First World War, when leading men was scarce. So she gave him the opportunity to be in two of her movies. When he did not play the villain, played the second sort of male lead. And that sort of helped him tremendously. But the point comes, the great point comes, when he was discovered to play Julio in the film The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And Valentino was dead right for the character. They had searched Hollywood, they'd searched New York for someone who was suitable to play this attractive young tango dancer from the Argentine. Because the film is Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse is set in the initial stages in the Argentine, and it was essential to have someone attractive, physically attractive, who could dance the tango and make a hit. And June Mathis, who'd written the script for the film, she fought heaven and hell to get him for the role.
Are there any locations left in Hollywood that are associated with Valentino and his films?
Well, of course, the house that he bought roughly a year before he died, Falcon Lair, is still there, more or less intact as it once was in the late 20s, 1926, owned by Doris Duke. But she will not allow anyone to enter the house. In fact, it's all boarded up. You can't even see inside the entrance, because the gates are all boarded up, unfortunately.
And is there a restaurant down the street that was once his dressing room?
That I do not know anything about. It's news to me if there is such a place.
Leslie, there are rumors that Valentino did not die a natural death, that he was poisoned by a mistress. Is there any truth to that?
A lot of hooey went on about Valentino, the way he died. And it's a very well-known fact that he had an ulcerated stomach. In fact, the last year of his life, he had a great deal of unpleasantness due to this, and he didn't realize that he got duodenal ulcer. And it wasn't until he was in New York, he was rushed to the hospital and they operated, and it was too far gone. Things developed, and he died. There's no truth, as far as I know, the rumours that he was murdered or killed.
Does anyone know who the mystery lady is who is said to place a wreath on his grave?
Oh, I met the lady out here in Hollywood. You're talking about a woman called Dietra La Flamme. She was the woman in black. Yes. She had been a musician, a violinist. And when she was very ill in hospital, when she was very young, Valentino went to visit her in hospital and took her flowers. And they had a sort of thing between them. That is a sort of code that whichever one died first, they wouldn't forget, and they would place flowers on the grave, you see. Now, she herself told me this. I cannot vouch for the genuineness of the story, but I have no reason to disbelieve her, because Valentino was that kind of person. He was very generous and very kind to people, and he obviously felt sorry for this girl.
And so it was just kindness. It was a platonic relationship.
Oh, yes, there's no doubt about that. I got to know Dietra La Flamme fairly well, and she used to run the Valentino Guild out here, Valentino Association, and she used to run movies occasionally when she could. In those days, it was difficult to get any of the Valentino pictures. Most people thought they'd been lost forever. In fact, it's only latterly that some of the films have survived and come to light. And of course now Hollywood is taking more interest in its past, and they're trying to rescue what films are left. There are several Valentino pictures that have been lost forever, unfortunately, unless somewhere someone has a print.
Do you know the names? Do you know the titles?
Well, the lost films, one of the films most desired to find is Beyond the Rocks, Gloria Swanson. Now, I got to know Gloria Swanson, and the first thing she ever asked me when I first met her, "Oh, Mr. Flint, do you know where there is a print of the film I made with Valentino, Beyond the Rocks, for Paramount Pictures?" And I said, "No, Miss Swanson." I, too, have been trying to get a copy of that film. Anyway, she was very anxious to obtain it. As far as we know, the only copy may exist in Russia. You know, Russia has the biggest archive of American silent pictures. It's an extraordinary thing. But if any American pictures of the silent era in particular that have been lost, which America doesn't possess, are obtainable in Russia. But Russia, unfortunately, will not play ball. I do know that they have some of the lost films. There's the Sainted Devil, A Sainted Devil, which Valentino made with Helena Dalge, which was a very beautiful film in some respects. It went to pieces halfway through, but that's a personal objection that I have. But he was never more beautiful than he was. You'd say he was very cleverly photographed. And that film, unfortunately, seems to have disappeared. There was also The Young Raja, of which I have about a third of the film, which was survived. I got that from Buenos Aires. They found a complete print of the film disintegrating in the cans. They saved what they could and very generously made a copy for me. But it's only about 4 reels of the original.
Well, Valentino made about 33 films in his career, so...
Well, if you count the very early ones, the ones that before he was famous, maybe round about 23 or 4. But you see, from the Four Horsemen onwards, that's when it all began. That's when the hysteria, if you want to use that kind of expression about Valentino, started. And it's never diminished.
Well, what kind of influence did his wife, Natasha Rambova, have over his career? Was it a good influence?
I think in some respects he owed a great deal to Natasha. And he always gave the woman full credit. She was a very talented girl. She'd had a beautiful education. She became a ballet dancer with Theodore Kozlov, with his ballet. She then went into movies and designed sets, costumes. And she had a great influence upon Valentino. He fell madly in love with her. She always said she never wanted to be married anyway, and she certainly didn't want to have children. She was an ambitious lady with a career ahead of her. But she liked Valentino. She was attracted to him. When Valentino did a film for Nazimova, he was Armand to her Camille. Natasha Rambova was working with Nazimova at the old Metro studios, and she helped Valentino with his hair, because in the early scenes, Valentino, as Armand, came from the country. He was a country boy in the early sequence, and then he becomes sophisticated, and she helped to fluff his hair up. Well, he always had very sleek black hair, and he didn't like the idea of his hair being messed up, but anyway, she insisted. Anyway, they became very good friends, and you asked me earlier about any places where Valentino lived. The actual bungalow where Valentino lived for roughly a year with Natasha, when they were very much in love, presumably, still exists. It's on Sunset Boulevard. It's now two small shops. It's still there, that little bungalow where his love developed with Natasha.
Is there a plaque on the building anywhere showing where it is?
No, lovey. There's no such. No, unfortunately, about this town, I shouldn't say it because I love Hollywood. But this, I shouldn't say perhaps certain things I feel very impressed to say. It has little or no respect for its past. And that bungalow is still there, where Valentino courted Natasha Rambova. It's now two small shops.
What kind of shops? So what's the address?
I don't know what the shops are now, because I haven't made a point of going. When I first discovered the bungalow was still there, I did go and just have a look, you know. And it was very amusing to me, because at the back of these two shops, which was the bungalow, is the yard, and they both had a great interest in buying old furniture and redecorating it. And Valentino and Natasha would spend Sunday mornings or afternoons repainting furniture. And Natasha had this bizarre sort of, very sort of creative aspect about everything. Everything had to be very glamorous, and she'd do these extraordinary things. Probably that was Valentino's happiest year of his life.
When
the two of them were struggling, because you see, Valentino had fallen out with Paramount Pictures. And he was the first actor ever in Hollywood to have the strength of character to turn round to the studios and said, well, I'm not going to make these cheap, shoddy pictures. You see, Paramount was turfing out as many Valentino pictures as they could in as short a possible time to get the money in at the box office. They weren't interested in the quality of the film. Valentino was the great draw at the box office. So what did they do? They got him to make as many as 4 pictures of the year. They rushed him through, and a lot of it was trash.
There's a recent revival of a film called The Eagle.
Well, that film, The Eagle, was when he left, eventually, of course, Paramount. I just cap back a little bit, because after Valentino left Paramount, he and Natasha did a tour of the United States, dancing on the stage to earn a living. Valentino was not, by the fact that he had broken his contract, was not allowed to appear in any movies for any other organization. So Valentino and Natasha danced throughout the United States to make some money so they could live. He was the first actor who had the guts to turn round to the studios. I'm not going to make these cheap, shoddy pictures. I want the kind of pictures that I know I can give credit to, which will also be a credit to your studio. And she, with him, backing him, he left the studios. Anyway, so eventually Paramount, because they had thousands and thousands and thousands of letters demanding Valentino, they gave him a new contract. He was off the screen for 18 months, a much increased salary, of course, and then he started to make first-class pictures. The two of them were made at the Astoria Studios in New York City. He did Monsieur Vaquer, which is a big, spectacular, glamorous picture costume, which of course fitted him beautifully, and he gave an interesting and exciting performance. And then his contract was finished, and then Joseph Skink invited him to work for United Artists. That was Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Charles Chaplin, which was, in those days, the apex of the industry. If you were with United Artists, you really were the top, you see. And Joseph Skink eventually got Valentino into the United Artists, and he made The Eagle and The Son of the Sheik. They were the last two films that he ever made, you see. The Eagle was a Russian thing. Valentino played it with tongue-in-cheek. He didn't play it with a great seriousness, because actually, if you've seen the film, you'll realize that in a way, Valentino had this strange sense of humor. He was sending himself up, and he admitted that later. It was a romantic picture with beautiful Vilma Bankit, whom Schenk had brought over, Goldwyn rather, Sam Goldwyn, had brought over from Hungary. And she'd appeared in two other films with Sam Goldwyn. And she was the leading lady in Valentino's last two pictures. And she didn't speak very much English, actually. But Valentino had this dry sense of humor, and he really sent himself up in the nicest possible way. Of course, he looked magnificent in these Russian costumes, you see.
Yes.
And it was a sort of film with a certain amount of action, too, which was popular at that period of time with movies. In fact, he got very good notices for the film. And then he did The Son of the Sheik. Now, Valentino was never happy about The Sheik. He admits that it gave him his great success because everybody referred to him more or less as the Sheik, and it became a sort of thing. People used to talk about a boyfriend, oh, well, he's a bit of a Sheik, you know, and all that. It was became a sort of a fun thing in language among people of that period. He's a bit of a Sheik, you see.
That's the way most people remember it.
Yeah, well, of course, the point is that he hated the picture. But you see, that was the first film he made for Paramount. They were looking for someone who would play the Sheik, because the book itself had been a great bestseller, worldwide bestseller. And Valentino had left Metro. He'd asked Metro for a raise in salary, and they wouldn't give it to him, and he left. Then he went into Paramount, did the Sheik, and of course it was sensational success.
Talkies were coming about that time.
They came a bit later.
And how do you think that would have changed his career had he lived?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think Valentino could have been a success, like Garbo. Now, Garbo's silent pictures, as you well know, she was so beautiful and she was very impressive. And everybody was worried about whether Garbo, with a strong, thick accent, would be a success. Mm-hmm. But actually, she was a success. Mm-hmm. And she did Anna Christie, as you know, with a thick accent. But it fitted the character. But of course, Valentino, you must remember this, that Valentino was a very well-educated man. He spoke 4 languages fluently. If you were to see some of the letters that he has written, which I have got, you would be amazed that here was a man, an Italian, who could write such beautiful, fluent English. And there's no doubt he spoke very well, with a slight, very slight accent, which was added. He hadn't got a big voice. It was rather a deep voice, but throaty voice in a kind of way, which would have fitted his personality. You know he made a gramophone record.
No.
Well...
Where is it?
I have it. But the point is that way back in 1923, as a joke, he made a record, gramophone, the old 78 reps per second.
Yes.
Like you or I might make in the early days when we had the tapes, you know,
That's right.
tape. And everyone was shocked when they first heard themselves on tape, you see. But anyway, he made this record. On one side he sings El Relicario in Spanish, which he spoke fluently. And on the other side, in English, he sings one of the Indian love lyrics, a Kashmiri song. And I'm not saying I would be the last person to say that he had a wonderful voice. But you know that it was done for fun, and he had quite a voice. Yes. And with a little help, you know, he could have developed in that direction, too. He would not have been an operatic singer. But certainly, when you listen to some of the pop singers today, he was a bloody sight better than they are. I mean, let's face it.
Leslie, over the years, you have come to know members of the Valentino family, and you've also visited his birthplace.
Yes, I've been... I made a visit to Valentino's birthplace.
Which is?
Which is in southern Italy. And I had a reception by the mayor of the town. because, you know, they'd erected a statue to Valentino in Castellaneta, where he was born, and we took a big wreath there and put outside the house where he was born, which is still intact, and the mayor gave us a reception. You see, perhaps I shouldn't say this, Castellaneta, like a little southern Italian small town or large village, is an unknown quantity in the world. And I suppose to get publicity, because they wanted to get the place well known. I'm not saying they did this to get publicity, but there's no doubt that it did help that Valentino was born there, you see. So we went there on a pilgrimage, if you like, and I met some of the people there who, way back in the earlier years, had known the Valentino family. You see, Valentino's family were highly respected. I mean, this was more or less, I shouldn't say this, but it's true, a poverty-stricken place in southern Italy, way back at the turn of the century. Mostly, I shouldn't say peasants, but uneducated. That Valentino's father had been a cavalry officer. His mother had been the daughter of a Parisian doctor, and they spoke French as well as Italian, and they were a little bit upper class, you know. And his father did a great deal for the people of the village, and he also did a great deal for where the animals were concerned, because he was also a doctor, you see. No, we went there, and out here in Hollywood, when Valentino died, his brother came out here to see to the estate, and they had a big fight in the court with George Ullman, who was the manager of Valentino, and they saved what they could, but Valentino was very much inclined to spend more than he earned.
Leslie,
he was a very extravagant young man.
You know more about Rudolph Valentino than anyone else in the world.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I know a lot.
The little-known facts that people don't know, what else do you know about him that no one else really knows?
Well, you see, there's been such a lot of nonsense written about the poor man. You know, when a person's dead, they can say what they like and write what they like, and nobody can contest it or sue them.
Well, there have been 2 movies about him.
Oh, they were a load of junk. I mean, let's face it. I mean, those movies had no connection with the reality of the man at all. There was the backbone, if you like, but the flesh on the thing was nothing like Valentino. I mean, it's pitiful, really. You see, Valentino was no saint, who is. He was a very wonderful human being in many respects, very kind, very warm, had a terrible temper, like a lot of Italians, I suppose. But he had no illusions about himself. If he had the illusions at all, it was about women.
What would you like?
You see, he believed in people. He had faith in people. Natasha let him down, his wife, when she realized that she wasn't really going to make any real headway because Valentino was in the position to do a great deal for her. But then again, you see, a lot of things are not generally known. When Valentino signed the contract with United Artists, he had to sign a contract that said, under no circumstances was Mrs. Valentino, Natasha Rambova, to be allowed on the set. She had made herself so disliked in the film industry that nobody wanted to have anything whatever to do with the lady. Well, Valentino had this wonderful contract, so he knew that he had to sign it if he wanted to carry on in movies and earn a living, so he signed it. From that moment onwards, she didn't want to know him. And indeed, what did he do to pacify her? He financed her own production. She made a film called What Price Beauty. All the money came out of Valentino's pocket, money that he could ill afford at that time. And of course the film was an absolute disaster. And then she left him. And I have pictures of him at the railway station in Los Angeles, where he's, for the sake of the press, kissing her goodbye and all that. But he knew that he'd lost her. And from that moment onwards, and from that moment only onwards, did he play the field. Up to that moment, he was an adoring husband, worshipped woman. And after she left him, the Polo Negri thing started up. Well, Polo Negri was sniffing at the box office. shouldn't say this, but she was. And she saw publicity for herself by getting teamed up with Valentino.
Leslie, you have the largest collection of Valentino memorabilia in the world. Is there anything you don't have that you're trying to find?
Well, I suppose in a way, yes. The things that I most would like to possess, not just for my own satisfaction, that I might be able to present to other people so that they can see the variety of roles and characters that Valentino played. I'd like to get the missing films, especially the one that Gloria Swanson so much wanted. And of course there are 3 missing films, major films, and they're the things I would most
What are
like.
the titles of the 3 missing films?
Well, there's Beyond the Rocks,
yes,
The Young Raja, which I've got a bit of it, and of course The Sainted Devil.
yes.
They're the 3.
Leslie Flint, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.